Welcome to the Concussion Fix Podcast, where we lift the veil on concussion recovery and empower you with real answers to real questions about persistent concussion symptoms.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Concussion Fix Podcast. I'm Nikki, and I'm joined with Dr. Paul Hrkal and Melinda Krynen Hill, and we just had a great question on our Q&A where we were talking about fatigue and sleep and energy, or the lack thereof energy when it comes to PCS. Sleep is something that a lot of our members often talk about, how they're not sleeping well, they have a big crash in energy, hard to do even just day-to-day tasks because they don't have a lot of energy. So I thought maybe we can start with Dr. Paul and kind of get your perspective on how energy is affected and kind of what we can do to help with that also.
Fatigue is one of the most common symptoms after a concussion. And of course, that can persist when you have persistent concussion symptoms. When we look at the reasons why a person's fatigued, it's very multifactorial. I think what ultimately, if you boil it down at the cellular level, there's these little energy power plants called the mitochondria that become dysfunctional after an acute concussion. And even though that excitotoxic, inflammatory initial storm that happens after the initial brain injury subsides, the mitochondria can continue to be dysfunctional. And then there's many things that contribute to that dysfunction, like poor blood flow and deconditioning and persistent symptoms. And then there's some mood issues that can happen, and underlying deficiencies can exacerbate. So we talked about with this particular member about this. And their main concern was they were having unrefreshing sleep. So they slept long enough. So the first thing a person should be looking at when they're fatigued is, how's your sleep? And so, do you have sleep apnea? Is there insomnia that's happening? So that needs to be ruled out and that needs to be addressed. And so that's something that for this particular member wasn't so much a problem. They were able to sleep the whole night. They were able to get sleep. As far as they knew, they weren't waking up. But there was some neck pain, and they were wondering if neck pain was a cause or a culprit of that type of unrefreshed sleep. And absolutely, if you have chronic pain, that can definitely contribute to sometimes subconscious awakenings and sometimes very conscious ones that obviously are going to be disruptive of sleep. But you have to really unpack the sleep piece. Secondly, I think that we always have to check the box of, is there any sort of deficiency? Is there iron deficiency? Is there B12 deficiency? Those are the two most common things that cause fatigue. It's a quick and simple blood test. In the Concussion Fix course, we talk about all the key blood tests that a person should do. This, might be confused by this because how could a concussion cause iron issues? Well, there's a couple ways. Number one, it often is an underlying issue that is just now comes to the surface. So many people, especially women that are menstruating, that have very heavy periods, things like endometriosis, they're losing blood on a monthly basis and they're not repleting it enough. Other reasons could be that they just don't absorb things well, or they don't get enough in their diet, like for example, vegans or vegetarians. They just simply don't get enough iron. And so that can be just an issue. And so that often is flared or exacerbated after sustaining a concussion. So you have to address all that stuff. So for this particular patient, they had blood work checked and it was all normal. So that isn't a problem. So that was one box that was checked. And then you start looking at some other reasons like hormones. And so we know that after a concussion, hormones can shift, especially with the pituitary glands. And so hormones to think about are thyroid hormone, which can definitely cause fatigue, growth hormone, testosterone in males and women's, but particularly in males, especially if there's depression, you should be looking at that. And then I brought up the adrenal hormone, the HPA axis. And this is where a lot of testing kind of falls short, where you really need salivary or urinary hormone testing, in my experience, to really get a better and accurate assessment of your adrenal system, because if you're waking up and you're tired in the morning, that's when your cortisol should be going up. Your cortisol is your body's energy hormone. It helps with the production of glucose out of the liver, out of storage forms, and regulating blood sugar. It improves a lot of metabolic functions. So if a person's really feeling tired in the morning when they should be feeling energized, we are thinking about all the things I just mentioned, but the adrenal system is kind of in behind the scenes. And so in my experience, that's an often overlooked one. So I just pointed this particular member to that. But Melinda, you actually mentioned the kind of mindful aspect or the psychological aspect of fatigue. Um, so can you share a little bit about that? Because that's an area that I absolutely think is overlooked as a reason why people are actually tired.
Yeah, exactly. And it came up so genuinely with this member because, you know, sometimes we look so deep into like what are those underlying reasons, which make a lot of sense and can be so, so helpful and so crucial and important in recovery. But what about that one that's staring us right in the face, right? You just went through a huge stressful event. You have a concussion, your life changed, you've been through a million losses. You've probably
Mm,
had to adjust a lot of things going on for you. You're tired, right? Emotional pain is tiring, right? Fatigue, this overarching symptom of PCS, makes sense, right? So there's the acute concussion and the period after where you can feel tired for a lot of physiological reasons. But once that becomes sort of like a longer term thing, your life changes too, right? Not only are you dealing with all these physical symptoms, but you've probably had to adjust your social life, your activities, school, work, all of these things. All of those life changes are huge and they make you tired because you're overwhelmed. So there's
mhm,
this really obvious piece that's kind of staring us in the face that we sometimes just skip past because it's like, oh, we forget that, wait, big life events and it's particularly health challenges that change the way we are used to living our lives are going to make us feel tired. They're going to make us feel low. They're going to make us have a lot of disrupted sleep and appetite challenges purely from like a mood, emotional, and nervous system perspective. So that was where we kind of went with this member at the end of this question was, wow, okay, let's not forget about this huge piece. How can you address it? How can you unpack it? First of all, validating that fatigue can be emotional too, right? And it wouldn't even add up if you didn't have fatigue from emotional things because it is such a life-changing experience to start having PCS symptoms or to be diagnosed with PCS. So fatigue can very much be a emotional load that you're carrying that needs some addressing, that needs some TLC, that needs validating, even at the very
mhm.
least, is just this is happening. And yes, it's so tiring and so exhausting to be living with the symptoms I'm living with. And all the sort of snowball effect of that socially, work-wise, family-wise, just how you see yourself having to oftentimes having to reinvent your identity for a time period until you feel better. These are
Mm.
tiring things, right? It also makes sense to have a low mood or to have a lot of anxiety, depression and anxiety, whether they're clinical or not, right? Even just these feelings of being low or feelings of being anxious are tiring. So it's sort of this one big piece that we don't want to forget about. That I think, we can have seen so many times in our Concussion Fix program of people just feeling exhausted by everything they've gone through. And even just a validation of that can help.
Yeah, and living through those experiences, that tiredness, right? Like you said, it's overwhelming. I very much remember the overwhelming feeling of it all and how it can feel crushing and just having those emotions and just walking through them, experiencing through them, validating them, accepting them is a big part, and knowing it's okay with it also. And I think that's a great reminder because we often forget about that part. Emotions are very exhausting. Happy emotions, sad emotions, anxiety, stress, right? Like even if you're too happy for a long period, like it's tired after you're at a party, right? There's so much, like it's the same thing. Our emotions can cause fatigue, absolutely. So I think that's a
Mhm.
really, really great reminder.
Even like conditions like depression are associated with
Yes.
fatigue.
Yeah.
So, if there actually is a neurochemical issue, if there's a sympathetic and parasympathetic imbalance issue. I've seen all these things cause fatigue, even though, we kind of are, like you said, Melinda, we're programmed in society like, it's a badge of honor if we overwork and we overpush ourselves. And so it's very much in the physical realm of, I got to work extremely hard. I got to work long hours. I got to sacrifice sleep. However, I think that as you pointed out, there's a mental, emotional side of fatigue. And remember, people that are dealing with persistent concussion symptoms, their bandwidth for what things would not be fatiguing pre-injury is much lower. And so now something as simple as going to a doctor's appointment or riding public transit or just navigating a simple like store visits is fatiguing. So people, I see this with my patients all the time. People will go to do a few things that just is absolutely, totally normal for people to do all the time throughout the day, but just going to a store makes them exhausted. And so that bandwidth, the ability for them to tolerate even the basic amount of stressors can be fatigue inducing. So fatigue is a very, very broad symptom, lots of different factors. And as we've seen, Melinda, before, very multifactorial. And so in my opinion, with the Concussion Fix program, we just are checking one box after another. So if you're listening to this conversation right now and you're feeling overwhelmed, like I'm tired, where do I start? I've never been the same since I've sustained this concussion. Start with some of the things that we've all already mentioned and check off. Do I have any deficiencies? Okay, great. I don't have that. Is there a hormonal aspect? Do I or do I not? And address each one as you go. And then by the end, if you've checked all the boxes and you still have lots of fatigue, now it can be related to I'm dealing with these symptoms on a physical level. I'm dealing with them on a mental, emotional level. And that in itself can be a contributing factor to why you're tired. And so a lot of times this is to do with processing all this sensory input, where before it was easy to process all this, now that's overwhelming. And now you feel things like you have light sensitivity and noise sensitivity. In a sense, that's like sensory overload for people that have PCS. And we have to rebuild that threshold. And that's why so much, and this was actually another question, one of the first questions that we had during this last live, where we talked about, one of the key things is exposure just below kind of like symptom threshold is the remedy for intolerance. So if I have heat intolerance, which was a big thing right now because we're in the summer, I need to expose myself to a little bit of heat, but not too much. So if I have a little fatigue after doing a certain set of exercise, I need to challenge that a little bit every single day and recondition myself in whatever area you're struggling with right now.
And I might just jump in there, like even adding like a different perspective too. And this is sort of something of why we've designed our concussion fix pyramid the way we have, is actually inviting the reverse of the medical model, right? Which is let's first look at what's happening emotionally in your body, in your
Right.
nervous system before jumping to hormones, adrenals, even all these things that Dr. Paul's advising right now, which are certainly can play a part down the road when you've been living with PCS for a while. But almost the very first thing that I wish every medical model out there and every provider out there would address is like, whoa, you've just been through a lot. No wonder you're tired.
Right.
Even that phrase is so validating for somebody to hear when they're struggling because we live in this sort of like fix it mentality constantly. And so your nervous system never learns to relax and acknowledge what's happened.
Mhm.
And so you just try to go into what's all the reasons that I am tired and why that's wrong. Something's wrong with me. How do I fix that? Instead of being like, whoa, this happened to me. No wonder I feel tired. Let me take some rest and then start gradually figuring out how I can center myself. What are some nervous system regulation things I could do? What's going on in my mood? How can I work through overwhelm? Okay, if those things have been addressed and you're still really experiencing intense fatigue, then let's test adrenals, mitochondrial function, get into rehab for neck, vision. Like, so this is our, basically, I'm just kind of summarizing our concussion fix pyramid here
Mhm.
for our program, but really just recognizing that sometimes we skip over this big obvious thing of like, your emotional pain translates to exhaustion, overwhelm, fatigue. And
Mhm.
for our listeners, I think Nikki just briefly shared, but she also experienced concussion, went through our program, and now is our community success manager and kind of program manager as a whole, Nikki. I mean, we wouldn't survive without you. But that's kind of where she's coming from with her share there was how that was also part of your picture. So I don't know if you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, of just like you said, that validating part. I wish someone would have told me that back then. And on top of that, I had little ones. So not only was I like emotionally exhausted of just everything, but I was exhausted with little ones, which a lot of people do have little ones or just other expectations that take a lot of energy as well in the home. That even just taking out the PCS, validating like if you have a lot going on, it's okay. But then adding in the PCS, I wish someone would have validated like that direct for me back then because that would have been amazing. Um, but knowing it is okay, like you said, is I think going to be one of the biggest things. Um, and focus, not necessarily focusing on that, but just acknowledging it, accepting it, being able to work through it. And that's where I think, and you had mentioned this in the call, and maybe you can kind of talk a little bit more on this, finding someone to be able to talk to about it. Sometimes it's just being able to unload it all to someone who isn't your partner, who isn't a child, a parent, a sibling, someone who is completely neutral, third party, who can see things objectively.
Mhm.
They're going to be a great person to sometimes just unload everything that you're feeling, everything you're going through, and being able to kind of help you through that. So
Yeah,
can
help you
you kind of talk on
process.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of psychologytoday.com. I think it's a great global resource to find a counselor, therapist, psychologist in your area, depending on what your needs are. And it is a thing, right? Sometimes when we go through this, we're trying to sort of keep up with our old life, whatever happened before concussion. And
Mhm.
along with that comes a lot of expectations from the people around us, our family, our siblings, our friends, our teachers, our sports coaches, our, whoever's in your life or, colleagues and whatever that might be. Um, there's a lot of expectations to sort of like stay who you were. And it can be really hard to sort of take a step back and start setting boundaries and say, hey, I'm going through something. I need time. So that actually aggravates everything. So the earlier you can kind of address and process the losses and struggles that you're having, the more likely it is that you'll learn skills to help set you up to reintegrate into your life in a way that's going to work with PCS symptoms.
Mhm.
And too often in our program, we see people just push themselves right to the end, totally max out, their nervous system's totally dysregulated, and then they have to go back and set boundaries and take a step back from their life and start over that way. So it would be just this wonderful world if we knew that it's okay to take time first when something bad happens with our health, with a head injury, to be able to kind of find your footing again before trying to be the person you were before this happened to you. So yeah, that's kind of my jam. That's what I talk about with people all day in my practice. And it is obviously an area I'm really passionate about. And so if anyone is looking for someone to talk to, psychologytoday.com is great. It is global. There's a lot of different countries listed on there that can help you match up with someone to support you through PCS. You can filter for things like traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety, even just like worry, overwhelm, life transitions. You can kind of click all those off and find someone that might have a good sense of how to support you. So I do really encourage that. Sometimes, it's not needed, and that's totally okay, right? It's just nice to know it's always an option. Sometimes we can actually listen to something like this and be like, you know what? I am going to talk to my family about how I'm doing too much, or I am going to talk to my workplace about how I'm pushing myself too hard. Pacing yourself in a way that makes sense is really going to help with fatigue. It's going to help with emotional energy. It's going to certainly increase your capacity, not only to cope with what's going on, but to move through all of these other elements we talk about in our program from a rehabilitation
Mhm.
perspective.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Good points.
Yeah. And then once that part, then, continuing with what Dr. Hrkal was talking about of getting the blood work done, looking at all of those things, I think are going to be really, really great tools to kind of give you that big picture. I know we didn't really talk a lot about it, but even like sleep hygiene, all of those things that
Mm,
sometimes, those doomsday scrolling that we don't realize we're doing because that's kind of our downtime might be something sucking energy. So looking at, all of those things.
habits.
It takes effort to do this, right? Like I think the thing that you suggested, Melinda, is absolutely correct, where like, the mindset and the psychology is the bedrock, but it often is the toughest thing for people to shift because it does require work. Where something like, getting a blood test to look at if you're iron deficient could be something that could be low-hanging fruit for people to address, which is why I kind of brought it up initially as like quick boxes to check. And I think also
Absolutely.
if you go to your family doctor, it's the first thing that they're probably going to think of. So like, check that box. It's fairly easy to get. And when you're low in iron, you are not going to be able to just have the capacity to start moving your body and even start, thinking the right
Exactly.
way because
Mm,
you need it for neurotransmitter production. So I think it all works together, and that's kind of the
mm,
beauty about, if we're talking about fatigue, you can start checking these boxes and then spend some time working on the things that we did. And we haven't really even talked about because I think Dr. Marshall would address this, is kind of the deconditioning fact. The fact that a lot of people, when they sustain a concussion, they often stop moving because their capacity is majorly impaired. So, of course, they don't exercise much. Whatever their activity level was before, even if it was sedentary, has probably decreased to the point of what we call it being deconditioned, which is another fancy way of saying you're just really out of shape. And so when you've been told to sit in a dark room and lie around and wait till symptoms get better, and you've purposely been protecting yourself from doing more things, well, now even the most simple activities are going to be very energy taxing. So I'm a big kind of proponent of tackling the deconditioning aspect. And that's ultimately why the
mm.
research shows that steady state cardiovascular exercise within sub-symptom threshold is so powerful, is because it starts reconditioning you, where so many people that are listening to this that have been going through persistent concussion symptoms have had periods of time in their recovery where they haven't done much at all. And that
Yeah,
leads.
you're so right, Dr. Hrkal. Yeah, it really is something that all has to work together. Because in order to sort of have the energy to even address emotional things, you also need to have energy. So there's psychological ways to approach that, there's physical ways to approach that, and none of them are wrong. It's all just sort of like what's helpful. And I think that's the great thing about these conversations we have in our podcast, but also in the program is just like what's the best way for each individual because it's so different. What one person needs is completely different from what another person needs.
You need all of it. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's not one's better than the other. It's like you all have to have it addressed. And most people have like one or two things that really are holding them back. Like, would you say that's the case? Like, I would say like my patients, we start like, being a little more detective and figuring out like what's really driving your fatigue. Is it you're in chronic pain all the time? Is it that you're depressed? Is it that
Yeah.
you are deficient? Or is it that you have poor sleep? So there's a whole bunch of things. So you have to be mindful and thoughtful about your particular case and your particular set of symptoms and try to figure out why
Yeah.
am I fatigued? And then focus your attention on those main things.
Mm,
So that's why I love the starting with the mindset because it allows you to have more clarity of like what actually is driving your issues and then really
yeah.
get after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, this
I-
conversation could go into 1,000 different places from
Yeah.
nutrition to I'm just looking at my own like little happy light that I have noticed has actually increased my energy over the last couple of weeks since I got it and started to use it. Even though it's summer and I get daylight, having this on at my desk has increased my energy so much. It's amazing. And like I said, like the food, just the
Yeah,
activity, like we could
totally.
go into 1,000 different
Yeah.
topics off of this one topic. But I think, we covered a lot already, went into a few really, really good areas that people can look into. Um, a few parting words maybe while we wrap this up so that we could, like I said, we could be here for 2 hours talking about all the different things that we could try. But maybe a parting word from you, Dr. Hrkal, and then we'll go to Melinda.
I think I just shared what I would really like people to know is, like be mindful and thoughtful about what you're experiencing and all the things that we've talked about today could be a source of fatigue for you. Which one of those really, or which couple of those are the main ones for you, and just kind of slowly, like literally put pen and paper and write some of these out, being like, how's my sleep? How's my nutrition? Am I moving my body? What's my thought process? Am I always like in ruminating thoughts? Do I have anxiety? Like, like all these things could be sources of fatigue. Write them out, check them off, and then circle the ones that are like, you know what, I haven't really had a chance to address that. And then go after that one.
Mm. I really like that. That's helpful, especially writing it out, because writing it out just has such a different impact and lands differently
Totally.
than when you just try to go through it in your mind, it gets lost. Yeah, I think just my kind of closing remark would just be that you're not alone, right? Listen to these podcasts, join the programs, talk to someone, right? That, figuring your way out through PCS and fatigue being such a huge one is not something you need to do on your own. So talk to people, find your supports, and, know that it will get better over time.
Great. And I love that you said that you're not alone because I always end our podcasts with that. So just a reminder that recovery is possible and you are not alone. Have a great day,
Yay.
everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Fix podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful and that it gave you a little more clarity, hope, and confidence on your road to recovery. Remember, every step you take matters, no matter how small it may seem. If you feel that you could use a little more support on your healing journey, check out the Concussion Fix program. Just visit concussiondoc.io or simply type Concussion Fix into Google and read some of the reviews from people who've already walked this path. With over 3,000 success stories and an average symptom reduction of nearly 50% in just the first few weeks, it might just be the help you need to break through. Thank you again for listening. If you found value in this episode, please share it with someone you think could benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a session. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay curious, and continuously remind yourself that recovery is possible.